Hi, today's learning objective is sauteing. Sauteing is to cook quickly in a small amount of fat over high heat. Stir frying is also a technique that's very similar to sauteing. We're going to saute our chicken breast with turkey stock, cremini mushrooms, and artichoke hearts. Stay tuned. Alright, so to prepare our sauteed chicken, you may notice that I have a sanitizer bucket here. Now in the lab here at Santa Fe Community College, we use what's called a quaternary sanitizer. It does not matter how nutritious your food is if you're not handling it safely. So before we go too much further, I really want to discuss the idea of food safety. Now I prepped my chicken, and after I prepped my chicken, I wiped down all of my surfaces, my food contact surfaces, meaning my hands, the cutting board, the knife that I used to prep it. I wiped it down with this quaternary sanitizer. Now this kills bacteria based on the parts per million of the sanitizer. You don't ever want to dry anything off with a towel after you wipe it with a quaternary sanitizer, because you wipe the sanitizer away and you recontaminate your food contact surfaces with the pathogens that are located in your towels. So you really want to let things air dry. Now this, if I were to have prepped my chicken on my cutting board and didn't clean my food contact surfaces, and then prepped a ready-to-eat food such as a salad or a pastry or deli meat, that would be an example of cross-contamination, which means you transfer pathogens from one food to another. Ready-to-eat foods like salads, lettuce, vegetables, those are potentially hazardous. You want to make sure that you handle those very carefully. So what I'm going to do first in preparation for this is I'm going to season my flour. And I'm going to dredge my chicken in this just enough so that the chicken doesn't stick in the bottom of the pan. And what that helps me do, it helps me to develop the fond. You'll see an example of fond here in just a minute. So I'm going to season my flour. Now if your dredged flour doesn't have any flavor, your chicken's going to have less flavor than what it would have if you seasoned it. So I've got a little bit of dried parsley here, some kosher salt, fresh cracked pepper. We're going to need to put a little bit more in there. We really want to have a flavorful dredge. Similar to the idea of, let's say, shake and bake. The popular chicken flavoring, I guess, in the 70s. You really have to be careful when you're handling chicken. You need to treat your chicken like it's toxic waste, because the way that chicken is processed in this country certainly leads to the notion that it's akin to toxic waste. Salmonella is the foodborne illness that's most commonly associated with chicken. So now that I've got my flour seasoned, it doesn't need to be anything elaborate. You can put a little cayenne pepper if you want some kick. You can put tarragon if you want to make it more French. Say dry basil if you want to make it more Italian, or rosemary. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my chicken breast, and what I did was I butterflied this. Meaning the chicken breast was thick, so what I did was I took a knife and I cut it right down through the middle and opened it up in a kind of a butterfly shape. And the reason that you do that when you're sauteing is because, again, you cook quickly in a small amount of fat. If your chicken breast is thick, what will happen is you'll burn the heck out of the outside of it, and the inside will be raw. Now, I'm not much of a fan of chicken tartare. And you've got to make sure that you cook your chicken to a minimum internal temperature of 165 degrees. And with that, you'll assure yourself that you're less likely to get sick with salmonella. And I don't know how many of you have ever had food poisoning, but it's about the most miserable sick you will ever be. So to prepare our vegetables for this, we're going to do what's called blanching and shocking. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my green beans and I'm going to drop them in this boiling water. And the reason that I'm doing that is you want to start the cooking process and then you want to halt it immediately. See, my beans are starting to change color now. They're turning a brilliant green. And I'm doing this so that I can saute them and they cook evenly. As soon as you start to see that brilliant green color change, you're going to drop your vegetables into ice water. Now while I'm doing that, I'm going to start the pan for my chicken so I make sure that my oil's nice and hot. This is called cooking a la minute, which means everything is done a la minute. So now I've dropped my green beans in the ice water, and that's going to stop the cooking process in preparation for me to saute them. My pan is getting hot here with my olive oil, And again, I prefer to cook in olive oil. I think it adds an interesting flavor profile. It's also a monounsaturated fat. All right, my oil's getting hot. And when you saute, you've got to make sure that your pan is hot and your oil is hot. I've got a little bit too much in this pan, so I'm going to take some out and save it for my green beans. But you can see how little oil I'm really actually using. We could probably go even a little bit less. There you go. Now most cooks, when they're first starting out, end up actually kind of pan frying rather than sauteing. And I certainly was guilty of that too. I remember one chef I worked with asked me, "What are you doing? Are you pan frying or are you sauteing?" I don't know. So now you guys know. All right, my chicken has been dredged in flour, and I'm going to take this and I'm going to lay it into my hot oil. You can hear that sizzle as it hits the pan. Now, a real common misconception is that when you put something in a pan, you have to keep moving it. That's not necessarily the case. You want to give it a good shake to make sure it's not sticking, but if you continue to move it, you do not develop what's called fond. And that's those little crispy leftovers that are in the bottom of the pan. We're going to use that to build our sauce. Cooking is a step-by-step process, and if you try and rush the process in any way, your end result is going to be less flavorful and less satisfying than it would be if you just would have taken your time. You have to develop the skills, then you can develop the speed. So let's check our chicken. We need a little bit more brown on it. Color is flavor, and if you don't develop that good brown color, you don't develop the fond in your pan, and it certainly won't have the flavor profile that you're looking for. So you can hear that chicken sizzling. Now the color's starting to creep around the outsides. That's usually a pretty good indication that you're getting there. So let's turn it. And I use tongs when I cook. I never use forks. The reason being is that if you try to flip something with a fork, you have to pierce the skin. When you pierce the skin, or the meat, you end up losing moisture. And moisture is what's going to give you the flavor that you're looking for. So we're going to cook this to about 3/4 of the way done. And then we're going to take it aside and let it rest. And while the chicken is resting comfortably, we'll begin to build our sauce. Now chicken I would eat at least medium well. I wouldn't ever eat chicken anything under that, simply because you run the risk of contracting salmonella, and food poisoning is an ugly way to be sick. Alright, so our chicken is about 3/4 of the way done. Now I'm going to begin to build our sauce. I'm going to add just a touch more olive oil. Let's borrow it back from that pan. I'm going to saute my garlic. And then to that I'm going to add cremini mushrooms. I prefer using a darker mushroom for this. With a darker mushroom you get a darker flavor. Now I'm dry sauteing these, which means my pan is very, very dry. You want to make your calories count. I guess I can add a little bit more oil to that. Now I'm going to add my artichoke hearts. A little bit of dried parsley. Now you add the dried herbs at the beginning of the cooking process, and you add fresh herbs at the end of the cooking process. Now right here I've got some chicken stock that I made. And chicken stock is one of those potentially hazardous foods. Again, hot food needs to stay hot, cold food needs to stay cold. And we made this chicken stock by boiling chicken bones with a mirepoix, carrot, celery, onion. Turn down our heat a little bit. And it's almost zero fat. All of the fat, when you cool down your stock, coagulates and becomes solid. Once you skim that fat off, there's very little fat left in the stock itself. Alright, so we've got our sauce going here. Let's start our vegetables. You have to make sure that you time everything. You have to make sure that you time everything so it's all done at the same time. Alright, let's move this out of the way since we're done with the water. Don't need that anymore. Let's put our sauce back here to reduce, and we'll do all our work on the front burner to make it a little more accessible. Now our sauce is starting to reduce nicely, and the stock is picking up all that fond, or all the brown crusties, crispies that got stuck on the bottom of the pan. And you'll see our sauce is starting to develop a color all its own, kind of a caramely color. That's what you want. Now I'm going to saute my garlic. We're going to season our sauce with some kosher salt, a little bit of cracked pepper. Now remember, with fresh cracked pepper, use a little bit and then add more if you need it. Alright, I'm going to pull my green beans out of the ice water bath. Add my beans to my olive oil and garlic, kosher salt, cracked pepper, and we're just going to roll these around. The actual cooking has already been done in the boiling water. Now, when you're sauteing, don't ever bring flame into the pan unless there's alcohol in it. What happens is there's oil vapors that rise up from the pan, and the flame sucks it in. The flame will suck into the pan, and it'll taste like burnt oil. It's not a pleasant taste. All right. So I've got my plate sitting on this burner right here to warm just slightly. You don't want to put hot food on a cold plate because it's going to cool your food down dramatically. Now, our sauce back here has reduced to almost a nappe stage. Nappe is a French term meaning coats the spoon. Now, I'm not going to add any additional fat to this, but if you wanted to, you could put a butter mount in there, which means you just drop whole butter right into your sauce after the flame has been turned off, and it gives it a really creamy consistency. Butter is not your enemy. Butter adds flavor and richness to dishes, but for the sake of this class, we're going to leave that out. Now I'm going to plate my green beans, and they still have a nice snap to them, which means you retain the nutrient density. Anytime you see overcooked, rubbery, brown vegetables, they're not going to be nearly as nutrient dense as this is. You want to make sure that you maintain that vitamin content, or what are you really eating it for anyway? Plus, they don't taste as good. So I'm going to plate my chicken, and I'm going to take my sauce, and I'm going to pour it right over the top. And now I'm going to go have lunch. Thank you very much.